He thought he was just delivering a baby on the side of a snowy road. He didn't know a camera crew was watching, and the world was about to know his name. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The snow hadn't started falling yet, but the sky wore that heavy gunmetal gray that meant it was coming, and soon. The cold had a bite to it that morning, seeping through the garage's thin metal walls and coiling around Michael Dawson's ankles like an unwelcome guest. He rubbed his hands together briskly before leaning back under the rusted Ford pickup he'd been working on since sunrise. His knuckles were cracked, his fingertips calloused, and a dull ache had settled in his lower back, an ache that had started whispering louder every year since Maggie died. The heater in the office had gone out again, and Michael didn't have the money or time to fix it. Rent was due in 3 days. Lily needed new snow boots, and the engine hoist was starting to stick again. Life, as usual, was a game of patchwork and prayer. But Michael had grown used to it. He didn't complain. There was something sacred in the routine, the way the tools always lay exactly where he'd left them, the smell of grease and coffee, the quiet rhythm of work that kept his thoughts from drifting too far into the past. Lily had left that morning in a flurry of laughter and mismatched mittens, her backpack bouncing against her coat as she raced to catch the school bus. "Bye, Daddy," she'd called, turning back with a grin that looked far too much like her mother's. Moments like that stitched Michael together, even on the worst days. The town of Pine Grove didn't offer much. One diner, one gas station, a library that closed at 5. But for Michael, it was the only place that made sense anymore. He knew the names of every face that walked through his garage door. He knew which trucks belonged to which farmers by the sound of their engines. Here, he wasn't just the man who could fix your timing belt. He was the man who showed up when your battery died at midnight, who let you pay next week if times were tough. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose tin above his head. Michael didn't flinch. He tightened one last bolt, rolled out from under the truck, and looked toward the road, not knowing that everything was about to change. The cold came in sideways that afternoon, riding the wind like it had a grudge. It howled down Main Street and needled through the cracks in Michael's garage, shaking the old panes of glass like they might give up and shatter. He watched from the bay window, coffee in hand, steam rising in slow, reluctant curls. The forecast called for a big one, 8 inches, maybe more, the kind of storm that shut down schools and made people drive like they'd forgotten how tires worked. Michael's boots scraped against the concrete as he made his way back to his workbench. The top drawer of his toolbox groaned in protest before catching entirely, jammed halfway open, like it was just as tired of pretending. He yanked it once, twice. The thing had been a gift from his father-in-law, a man who once believed Michael would open a chain of shops one day, not barely survive out of one. He finally pried it loose with a grunt, only for the contents to spill. Sockets, wrenches, even that small flathead he could never seem to keep track of, clattering to the floor like coins in an empty piggy bank. Michael stared at the mess, then dropped down to his knees with a sigh that carried far too many burdens. The rent was 2 weeks overdue. Landlord had left a voicemail that morning, polite enough, but layered with that subtle pressure, the kind that reminded you your grace period was about to turn into a court summons. He had half a loaf of bread left at home, a gallon of milk one day from expiration, and $12 in his wallet, 8 of which needed to go in the gas tank just to make it to the parts supplier. Michael wasn't dramatic. He didn't throw things or punch walls. But there was something about that moment, kneeling on cold concrete, surrounded by tools he couldn't afford to replace, staring down another unpaid bill, that made his breath hitch just a little. Outside, a siren wailed faintly in the distance. The wind rattled the sign out front. He stood slowly, pressing his palm to the workbench like it was the only thing holding him up. Tomorrow he'd find a way. He always did. But today he was tired. The gas station sat at the edge of town like a forgotten outpost. 2 flickering pumps, a weather-beaten canopy, and a bell that jingled every time the front door swung open, no matter how many times someone tried to silence it with duct tape. Michael pulled in just as the first flakes began to fall. Fat, slow ones that floated like they didn't yet believe in the storm they were part of. He turned off the ignition and stepped out, bracing against the cold. The wind had picked up, sharper now, and it carried the distinct scent of snow and wood smoke. He grabbed the pump, swiped his nearly maxed-out debit card, and listened to the satisfying click of gas flowing. At least for now, the truck would make it through the night. Through the smudged window of the gas station's small shop, he could see a scene unfolding. 2 out-of-towners in matching puffer jackets stood at the counter, their arms flailing in frustration, while the young clerk behind the register looked like he was contemplating quitting on the spot. Michael tilted his head, listening, as one of the tourists raised her voice. "How does your card reader not take chip? It's 2025, for God's sake," the woman snapped, her breath fogging the glass. The man beside her added, "We were told there was a resort out here. You're telling me there's no reception and no Wi-Fi either?" The clerk, barely older than 16, shrugged with the deadpan calm of someone used to weird questions. "Welcome to Pine Grove." Michael watched, the scene oddly surreal. People didn't come to Pine Grove unless they had to or were lost, and these 2 looked like they belonged in a different zip code entirely. He glanced down the road. No fancy SUs parked nearby, no signs of a camera crew, but still, something about their energy buzzed wrong. He finished fueling and stepped inside, just as the doorbell let out its familiar broken jingle. The woman turned and glanced at him, eyes flickering with sudden calculation. Michael nodded politely, grabbed a coffee from the machine, and paid in cash. The tension in the room didn't lift, just shifted, like a dog sensing something in the distance long before its owner. As he stepped back outside, coffee warming his hands and snow beginning to fall in earnest, Michael caught one last look at the 2 tourists still arguing. They weren't just annoyed. They were watching the road, waiting for something. He didn't know it then, but they weren't lost at all. They were exactly where they needed to be, and so was he. The snow was falling harder now, thickening into a curtain that blurred the world in shades of white and gray. The road back to Lily's friend's house was mostly empty, the few tire tracks already softening under the relentless flurry. Michael drove slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on the heater vent, coaxing a little more warmth into his fingers. The old truck's tires groaned over the frozen asphalt, windshield wipers smearing more than clearing, but he knew these roads like the back of his hand. Every dip, every bend, every spot that turned into an ice rink in the winter. As he crested the ridge before the long sloping hill into Briar Hollow, something caught his eye. Headlights, flickering, moving wrong. The white sedan ahead veered sharply. One moment it was hugging the road, the next it hit a patch of black ice and fishtailed. Michael's stomach dropped. He watched, helpless, as the car spun once, twice, and then slid off the shoulder into the ditch with a muffled crunch. Without thinking, he braked and eased the truck over to the shoulder. The snow was already coating the ground in a thin, slippery blanket, and he felt the tires shift beneath him as he came to a stop. Hazard lights blinking, he threw the truck into park, grabbed his gloves from the dash, and jumped out. Cold air slapped his face as he ran toward the crumpled sedan. Steam curled up from under the hood, ghostly, in the pale light. He could barely make out movement inside. He knocked hard on the driver's side window. "You okay?" The window cracked open, and a woman's panicked voice answered, "Help! She's in labor!" Michael blinked. For a split second, he thought he'd misheard. But then he saw the second woman in the back seat, reclined, face contorted in pain, clutching her belly. Something primal snapped into place. The mechanic, the father, the man who'd once held his wife's hand through 16 hours of labor, all of it fused in that one moment. He didn't hesitate. He yanked the door open, heart pounding now, not from the cold, but from the weight of what he was stepping into. "Okay," he said, voice steady despite the storm. "We're going to get through this. I need towels, water, and your trust." "You got all three?" The woman in the passenger seat stared at him, stunned. Then she nodded. Michael rolled up his sleeves, took a breath, and stepped into the most unexpected job he'd ever been handed. The interior of the car was stifling despite the cold outside, the windows fogged from heat and panic. Michael ducked into the back seat, the overhead dome light casting a dull glow on the chaos unfolding inside. The woman in labor was reclined awkwardly, her legs bent, one hand gripping the seat belt like a lifeline, the other cradling her belly. Her face was pale, jaw clenched, sweat collecting at her temple despite the freezing temperature. "Breathe," Michael said gently, crouching beside her, trying to assess the situation without overwhelming her. "What's your name?" "Jess," she gasped. "It's too soon. She's coming." The contractions were close. He didn't need a stopwatch to know that. He'd been here before, years ago, but he still remembered the look in Maggie's eyes when Lily had arrived early on a similar stormy night. He placed a steady hand on Jess's shoulder. "You're not alone, Jess. We're going to get through this." In the front seat, the other woman was fumbling with her phone, her fingers trembling. I can't get signal. It was working 10 minutes ago. We need to call the crew." Michael frowned. "Crew?" She looked up at him, startled, wide eyes, glossy lips, and a jacket that looked like it cost more than his monthly rent. "Yes, we were filming. She wasn't supposed to go into labor yet. They were going to meet us back on the main road, but we got turned around. I told them this route was a bad idea." Michael didn't have time for a full explanation. "Filming what?" She swallowed hard. "A reality series? Born Wild. It doesn't matter right now." Her voice cracked under the weight of stress, but Michael stayed calm. He shifted back to Jess, who let out a pained groan that pierced the small space like a siren. Her whole body tensed, and Michael knew they were on borrowed time. "Okay, Jess," he said, locking eyes with her. "I need you to focus on your breathing, all right? Short inhales, slow exhales. We've got maybe minutes before this baby says hello." Jess tried to nod, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. Michael reached for the emergency blanket from the trunk compartment, barely managing to spread it out beneath her in the cramped back seat. "You're doing great," he murmured, wiping her brow with an old flannel rag from his jacket pocket. Outside, the snow kept falling, muffling the world in silence. Inside, new life was demanding to be heard. The world outside had disappeared beneath a blanket of white. The snow, the storm, the frozen air, it all faded into silence. Inside the car, though, everything pulsed with urgency. Jess gripped the back seat like it could anchor her to reality, her face contorted in pain, her breath sharp and uneven. Michael knelt beside her, his hands already moving, his voice calm but steady, the way his wife had once needed his to be. "Jess, I know it hurts. I know you're scared. But I need you to listen to me now, okay? We don't have time to panic. We've only got time to bring this baby into the world." She nodded, barely, her eyes glassy and wide. He turned to the other woman, still frozen in the front seat, phone useless in her lap. "You?" he said, not unkindly. "What's your name?" "Amanda," she stammered. "Okay, Amanda, I need your help. There's a thermos in the truck. Bring it here. I need warm water and whatever clean towels you've got. Move fast." Amanda blinked like a light had just switched on and scrambled out of the car into the snow. Michael turned back to Jess. "I'm going to check, all right?" he said, slipping off his coat and laying it across her legs. He moved quickly, assessing what he could in the cramped space, and his heart dropped when he saw just how close the baby was. "She's crowning," he said, mostly to himself. "All right, Jess, here's what we're going to do. When the next contraction comes, I need you to push. Not hard, just enough to help her through. You've got this." Jess whimpered. "I can't. I'm not ready." "Yes, you are," he whispered. "You're already doing it." His voice dropped into that quiet, confident rhythm only someone who had been here before could find. He thought of Maggie, the way she gripped his hand so tight it left a bruise, the way she screamed and cried and then laughed through tears the moment Lily arrived. He remembered the sound of new life, the silence before the cry, the fragile miracle of it all. Amanda returned, arms full of towels and trembling hands. Michael took them without a word, folded them beneath Jess, and took his position, eyes focused and unwavering. "Okay, Jess, it's time." She screamed, pushed, sobbed, pushed again. And then, just like that, there she was. A baby girl, small and red and wailing, full of life and fury, cradled in Michael's rough, calloused hands. He wrapped her in a towel, cleared her nose and mouth, and handed her to Jess, whose face broke into sobs and laughter all at once. "You did it," Michael said softly. "She's here." And for a brief moment, in that snow-covered ditch, on the side of a forgotten road, the world stopped turning, and a tired mechanic held the impossible in his hands. The baby's cries pierced through the frost-muted world like a spark in the dark, raw, loud, undeniable. Jess clutched her daughter against her chest, her tears falling fast now, mingling with sweat and snow as she cradled the newborn in the crook of her arms. The chaos of labor had faded into the fragile stillness of a miracle. Michael sat back on his heels, wiping his forehead with a trembling hand. His heart was pounding, but he kept his face calm for Jess's sake. It wasn't his first time witnessing birth, but it was the first time since Maggie, and somehow, even through the cold and exhaustion, he felt the warmth of something bigger, something sacred. Then came the crunch of tires. It started faint, too deliberate to be random, but grew louder, closer, more intentional. Michael looked up just in time to see a dark van pull in behind his truck. Its sliding side door opened with a metallic scrape, and out stepped a man in a down parka, heavy boots, and a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. In his gloved hands, a camera. Michael blinked. "What the hell?" "Keep rolling," the man called over his shoulder. Another person stepped out with a boom mic and headphones, eyes scanning the scene like they were walking onto a set. Amanda jogged over, her breath steaming. "They found us," she said, almost relieved. "Finally." Jess looked up in a haze. "They filmed that?" "We didn't plan for it to happen here," Amanda muttered, brushing snow off her sleeve. "They were supposed to be waiting on Route 9. We got turned around." The cameraman circled the car, filming every angle, the crumpled fender, the blankets, the newborn in Jess's arms. "This is gold," he muttered to himself. "Absolute gold." Michael rose slowly, the warmth in his chest replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "You were filming this?" "It's a reality show," Amanda said, trying to sound casual. "Born wild, real births in unpredictable places. It's all legal, I swear. Jess signed waivers months ago." Michael stared at her, stunned. "You let her go into labor out here in a snowstorm for a TV show?" "No, it wasn't supposed to go like this," Amanda insisted. "We thought we had more time. She wasn't due for 2 more weeks. We were just scouting locations." Michael looked back at Jess. She wasn't saying anything now, just holding her daughter, her eyes locked on the tiny face nestled against her. And then the cameraman turned to Michael, adjusting his focus. "Hey-oh," he said, pointing the lens directly at him. "That was incredible. The way you handled everything, it was like you've done this 100 times. You're a natural." Michael stepped back. "Turn that off. We'll blur your face if you want," the cameraman offered quickly. "But man, you're going to go viral. People are going to eat this up." Michael shook his head. He hadn't done it for an audience. He hadn't done it for cameras or credit. He'd done it because someone needed help, because he'd been there once, holding Maggie's hand, scared out of his mind. And yet, as the baby whimpered and Jess finally smiled, the cameras kept rolling. Michael didn't know it yet, but that footage, the quiet hero in flannel, the snow, the cry of new life, was already on its way to changing everything. That night, as Pine Grove disappeared beneath a blanket of white, and the snowplows carved their slow paths down Main Street, Michael sat at the edge of his worn-out couch with a mug of reheated coffee in hand, staring blankly at the muted television. Lily was asleep upstairs, snuggled beneath her pink comforter with her favorite stuffed bear tucked under one arm. The house was quiet, save for the occasional groan of the old radiator sputtering heat through the vents. Michael didn't have social media. He barely had reliable internet. Most nights his routine was simple: fix what he could, pay what he must, and hope the truck started the next morning. But tonight felt different, off. Like a storm had come and passed but left something behind. He didn't know that at that very moment the video was already climbing its way through the internet like a wildfire on dry grass. Shot from the lens of a reality TV camera and uploaded by an intern who didn't wait for executive approval, the clip was raw, unedited, unscripted, and startlingly human. A baby's first cry, Jashik, a woman's trembling voice, a man in grease-stained jeans, calm and sure, coaching a stranger through the most vulnerable moment of her life. No dramatic music, no flashy overlays, just snow, steam, and soul. By midnight, hashtags began to trend. Hero Mechanic, Snowstorm Birth, Dad on Call. Someone on Twitter dubbed him the mechanic with a heart bigger than his toolbox. Another stitched together clips of the birth and overlaid them with soft piano music, calling it the most beautiful 3 minutes on the internet. Local news stations picked it up first, then regional outlets, then the national ones. Comment sections flooded with praise. People wanted to know who he was, where he was from, what made a man with nothing still show up for strangers like that. And Michael, he didn't know any of it. He was upstairs by then, checking on Lily, tucking the blankets tighter around her little shoulders. He kissed her forehead, turned off the nightlight, and walked quietly back down the stairs, pausing by the window to stare out at the white-covered town. He didn't hear the buzz of his old flip phone vibrating on the counter. He didn't see the email piling up in his junk folder, and he definitely didn't know that by morning the world would know his name. The next morning the snow hadn't let up, but neither had the attention. Michael's alarm buzzed at 5:45 a.m., same as always. He rolled out of bed bleary-eyed, his body still sore from the cold ditch and the tension of the night before. He poured himself a cup of coffee, black and lukewarm, and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. Nothing felt unusual until he stepped outside. Parked across the street were 2 unmarked vans with dark windows and satellite dishes strapped to their roofs like antennae from a sci-fi movie. One had a big blue decal across the side, Channel 7 News. The other had a red logo Michael didn't recognize. He stood there, mug in hand, heart dropping into his boots. A man in a heavy coat saw him and immediately sprang into action, waving to his crew. "There he is!" Before Michael could take a single step toward the garage, the front doors of the vans opened and reporters spilled out like clowns from a circus car. Cameras, microphones, blinding lights. Snow crunched beneath their expensive boots as they made their way across the icy road with all the subtlety of a marching band. "Mr. Dawson, Michael, can we get a word with you? You delivered a baby in a snowstorm. How did it feel in the moment?" "People are calling you the Hero Mechanic Dad. Do you plan to go into medicine next?" Michael held up a hand like a crossing guard trying to stop a semi-truck. "I'm just trying to open the shop," he said quietly. But it didn't matter. Another car pulled up. Then another. Local news anchors, morning talk show producers, a YouTuber in a hoodie holding a selfie stick. They circled his shop like hawks with notepads, each hoping to get a fresh quote or exclusive shot. Inside, the garage was still as dusty and unglamorous as ever. Cracked linoleum, rusted tools, the smell of old oil clinging to the walls. But the moment he opened the big metal door, a reporter ducked inside and started filming like it was sacred ground. Michael barely got a chance to flip the lights on before someone stuck a mic in his face again. "How does it feel knowing millions watched you become a hero overnight?" He blinked at the man. "I didn't become anything. I just showed up." but showing up, it seemed, was all it took. More vans were pulling in now. A boom mic poked through the open window. Michael heard Lily stirring upstairs through the baby monitor. Thank God she hadn't come down yet. He backed away from the crowd, retreating into the garage like it could protect him. He wasn't used to this. Praise always made him itch. Cameras made him sweat. And being turned into something, someone he didn't recognize, that made his skin crawl. He just wanted to fix cars, raise his daughter, and make it through the week without something breaking down, inside the house or inside himself. But now the world had seen him, and it wasn't looking away. That night, the house felt quieter than usual, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that crept into the corners and made everything feel too big. Michael stood at the sink, scrubbing a stubborn patch of macaroni from a plate, but his mind wasn't on the dishes. It was on the cameras, the voices, the microphones shoved at his face, the strangers who somehow knew his name. Upstairs, Lily was unusually still. She hadn't rushed through her dinner with her usual questions about spelling bees or drawing contests. She hadn't begged to stay up 10 more minutes or asked for hot cocoa. She just sat there, chewing quietly, stealing glances at her dad like she was trying to figure something out. When he finally tucked her in, the usual chatter didn't come. She just held her stuffed bear tight and stared at the ceiling for a while before whispering, "Daddy?" Michael sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Yeah, Bug? Are you famous now?" He blinked. "What?" "Everyone at school said you're on TV, that you're a hero, that a baby came out in your hands and now the whole world knows." Michael sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, I guess a lot of people saw that video, but I don't think that makes me famous." She looked at him carefully, the way only kids can when they're searching for truth, not comfort. "So, does this mean things are going to change? Are we going to move? Are you going to be gone all the time, like movie people?" He let out a soft laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No, honey. I'm still your dad. I still got to fix Mr. Hanley's tractor tomorrow, and your lunch still needs to be packed, and your bedtime stories aren't going anywhere." "But they keep coming to the garage," she said, her voice smaller now. "What if they don't stop?" Michael took her hand in his calloused one. "Then I'll tell them to. Because nothing's more important than this house and this room and that little smile right there." She looked at him for a beat longer, then nodded, satisfied. "You think the baby's okay?" she asked after a moment. "I do," he said, his voice soft. "She's got a strong mama and a story that started with a whole lot of love." "Like mine?" He smiled now. "A real one, exactly like yours." She squeezed his hand. "Good. I don't care if you're famous. I just want my old dad who fixes things." "You've still got him," he said. "Forever." And as he turned off the lamp and walked back down the stairs, he realized that was the only part of his life that had to stay the same, because it was the only part that ever really mattered. The snow had finally begun to melt, leaving behind slush puddles and salt-stained sidewalks, but Michael's nerves remained frozen. It had been 5 days since the video went viral, and though the reporters had mostly thinned out, his phone hadn't stopped buzzing. He'd started turning it off by noon just to keep his sanity. The garage door still creaked, the register still jammed. The world, as far as he could see, should have returned to normal. But then a rental car pulled up, black, sleek, and way too polished for Pine Grove's muddy roads. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out in red boots that probably cost more than his whole truck. She was tall, confident, wrapped in a long wool coat with sunglasses pushed into her hair. She looked like she'd stepped out of a New York boardroom and into the wrong zip code. Michael watched from the garage bay, wiping his hands on a rag as she approached. "You must be Michael Dawson," she said, her voice smooth as a well-produced voiceover. "Depends who's asking," he replied warily. She smiled. "Carla Vega, executive producer of Born Wild, and a big fan." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You flew all the way here for that?" "For you," she said simply. "Mind if I come in?" He hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the garage smelled of rubber and oil, the usual symphony of clinks and whirs echoing faintly. Carla didn't seem fazed. She sat on the edge of a workbench like she'd done it before, pulling a sleek folder from her bag. "We want to offer you something," she began, her tone already rehearsed. "Not just a follow-up interview, not a guest appearance, a regular spot. A segment, really." Michael narrowed his eyes. "What kind of segment?" She opened the folder, revealing a proposal neatly typed on branded letterhead. "Dad on Call. Each week you help someone in a real emergency, not just car trouble, life moments, deliveries, stuck vehicles, unexpected snowstorms. We follow you, see what happens, no scripts, no nonsense, just real people and your real instincts." Michael let out a low breath. "So, you want to make a show out of me showing up for strangers?" She leaned forward. "That's exactly it. You're real. You're grounded. People trust you. They need someone like you on their screen, someone who reminds them that kindness still exists." He didn't answer right away. His fingers tapped absently on the metal shelf beside him. It sounded crazy. It was crazy, but the idea lingered, unwelcome yet oddly magnetic. Not because of the fame, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone saw what he did, the way he lived, and called it enough. "What's the catch?" he asked finally. Carla grinned. "No catch. Just your time, your heart, and a little bit of trust. We'll take care of the rest." And there it was, a door he never thought would open. A chance to do what he already did, but louder, brighter, broadcast to a world desperate for something real. He looked past her, out the window, where Lily's school bus was just pulling around the corner. "I'll think about it," he said, and he meant it. The proposal sat unopened on the kitchen table, right next to Lily's half-eaten bowl of cereal and a crayon drawing of a unicorn with mismatched legs. Michael hadn't touched it since Carla left. He hadn't even read past the first sentence. It felt like a stranger had walked into his house and handed him a lottery ticket, one he didn't know how to cash in without losing something else. He stood at the sink that evening, staring out the window as dusk settled over Pine Grove. The street lamp flickered on with a soft hum. The snow was melting in patches now, leaving behind muddy earth and crooked footprints. And still, that folder sat there, silently promising a life he didn't know if he wanted. Fame, cameras, contracts. It was everything he'd never dreamed of. Michael had always been a behind-the-scenes kind of man. He liked fixing things no one else noticed. He liked showing up without anyone clapping for it. That's how he'd lived, with quiet effort, quiet sacrifice. The idea of his face on screens, his voice cut and edited into catchy sound bites, felt like trying to fit a square wrench into a round bolt. And yet, the money. He'd done the math 100 times. If the numbers Carla had tossed around were even half real, it would mean no more skipping oil changes on the truck just to buy Lily new boots, no more waiting for overdue checks to clear, no more keeping the heat at 64 degrees all winter. He looked at the drawing Lily had left him. She'd written, "My Dad the Hero," in purple crayon at the top. His heart squeezed. He didn't care about being a hero, but he cared about her, about giving her a shot at something more. Music lessons, a school with art supplies, a home where she didn't hear the stress in his voice every time they passed the grocery store and she asked for something extra. Still, would being on TV change who he was? Would it make him less honest? Would it take time away from Lily, time he could never buy back? He poured a cup of coffee, took a seat, and stared at the folder again. The words blurred together, but one thing was clear. He didn't want to trade integrity for comfort, but maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to. Maybe this was one of those rare moments when doing something big didn't mean selling out, just stepping up in a new way. Still, he didn't open the folder that night. He just sat there thinking, hoping Maggie would have known what to do. It was the kind of morning that pretended to be spring. The sky was bluer than it had been in weeks, the wind a little less sharp, and the ice had finally surrendered its grip on the sidewalks. Michael had the garage door open, letting in the sun while he worked on Mrs. Dalton's minivan. Nothing major, just a worn-out alternator and a suspicious rattle that turned out to be a loose water bottle under the passenger seat. He was tightening the last bolt when he heard the soft crunch of shoes on gravel. Not heavy boots like usual, something lighter, hesitant. He looked up and saw her. Susan. She stood at the edge of the garage bay, one hand tucked into the pocket of a cream-colored coat, the other gently cradling the baby carrier slung over her arm. Her hair was tied up, loose strands catching the sunlight. And for a second she looked exactly the same, except now there was a softness in her eyes, like a storm had passed and left something peaceful in its wake. Michael straightened, brushing his hands off on a rag. "Didn't expect to see you again," she smiled. "Didn't expect to be here again." He nodded toward the carrier. "How's she doing?" "Perfect," Susan said, kneeling to give the baby a gentle rock. "She sleeps like a log, eats like a linebacker. I named her Grace." "That's a good name," Michael said, his voice low. "Fitting." They stood in silence for a moment, just watching the baby's tiny fingers twitch beneath the blanket. Then Susan looked up. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Properly. I've tried to think of the right words, but nothing seems enough. You didn't just help me deliver a baby. You kept me calm when I thought I was going to lose control. You anchored me." Michael rubbed the back of his neck. "I just did what needed doing." "No," she said gently. "You chose to help. You stayed when you could have driven away. Most people wouldn't have." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. Instead, he motioned toward the office. "You want coffee? It's not fancy, but it's warm." She smiled again. "That sounds perfect." They sat inside, mugs in hand, the baby dozing peacefully in her carrier between them. Susan glanced around the garage, at the clutter, the rust, the shelves packed with more parts than polish, and she didn't look uncomfortable. If anything, she looked relieved. "You know," she said, "I used to live in cities that never slept. My phone would ring at midnight with decisions about makeup or lighting or contracts, but out here, it's like the world exhales." Michael nodded. "It's quiet. People still wave at you when you pass by. Half the time it's someone who's fixed your roof or taught your kid math." "I miss that," she said, almost to herself. "I grew up in a town like this before the business got in the way, before everything turned into lights and noise and pressure." They shared another pause, longer this time, the kind where no one feels rushed to fill the air. "I think I needed to break down in a snowstorm to remember what peace looked like," she added, with a quiet laugh. Michael chuckled. "Well, next time you want to remember peace, maybe don't go into labor first." She laughed, a real one, not the kind for cameras, and for a moment it didn't matter who she was before or what she did for a living. She wasn't a story anymore. She was just a new mom. Sitting in a warm garage, drinking average coffee with the man who held her hand when she needed it most. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both felt it. Some moments, they don't end when the snow melts. They start there. The sun was barely up when the camera crew arrived. 2 vans, 4 people, and more equipment than Michael had seen in one place since the county fair stage collapsed in '09. He stood just inside the garage, arms crossed, watching as they set up cables and tripods and a boom mic so big it looked like it could pick up whispers from the moon. Lily sat on the steps with a bowl of cereal, swinging her legs and pretending not to stare. She'd already asked a dozen questions that morning. Will they film everything? Do I have to wear makeup? Can I still go to school if you're famous? Michael had given the same answer every time. I don't know, Bug. We'll figure it out. Carla appeared in her usual whirlwind fashion, clipboard in hand, red lipstick flawless, at 7 a.m. Michael, she beamed, ready for your big debut? He shrugged, tugging at the collar of his shirt. I wore the clean flannel. That's about all the prep I've got." She laughed. "Perfect. Just be yourself. Just be yourself. Easier said than done when someone's holding a camera 3 feet from your face." The first scene was simple. Michael walking into the garage like he always did. Open the door, flip on the lights, pour a cup of coffee. But the moment the director yelled, "Action!" nothing felt natural. He fumbled with the light switch, spilled the coffee, and forgot where to look. They cut, reset, tried again. By the third take, Michael wasn't sure if he was sweating from the heat of the lights or the heat of embarrassment. But then something shifted. Midway through the day, a woman from across town came in with a broken heater fan. Single mom, 2 kids, paycheck not due until next week. Without thinking, Michael walked her through the fix, jerry-rigged apart from the shelf, and told her not to worry about the cost. He didn't realize the cameras were rolling. Later, the footage was reviewed. Carla watched the playback with folded arms and a rare softness in her voice. "There it is," she said. "That's the moment. No scripted lines, no dramatic pauses, just a man doing what he'd always done, the way he'd always done it." The episode aired 2 weeks later under the pilot title, Dad on Call, Pine Grove's quiet hero. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't fast. But it felt like something people didn't know they needed. Comment sections flooded with messages. "He reminds me of my dad. Why am I crying over a heater fan? More of this, please, more of him." Michael didn't read the comments. He barely understood how to open the app. But Carla printed out the best ones and left them in a folder on his workbench. He kept it buried under invoices and spark plugs, but he never threw it out. And at night, when Lily curled up beside him and said, "I liked the part where you helped that lady," he smiled a little and said, "Me too." The world was watching now, but he wasn't performing. He was just showing up, and somehow that was enough. The checks started coming in quicker than the snow could melt. Not life-changing amounts, at first, but enough to cover the rent early, enough to replace the old space heater in the garage, enough to finally buy Lily the warm winter coat she'd been eyeing in the catalog for 2 years without saying a word. Michael used to measure his success by how many engines he could fix before sundown. Now he found himself sitting at the kitchen table with spreadsheets and phone calls from accountants, his name printed neatly on paper he didn't quite know how to read. Carla sent him a new set of tools, top of the line, titanium-coated everything, the kind of wrenches that made old-timers whisper reverently. He laid them out on the bench, gleaming and untouched, afraid to smudge them. Things were good. Until they weren't. It started small, a comment on a reposted video. "Does anyone else think it's weird how he lets his daughter run around the shop like that? Isn't that dangerous?" Then another. "Love this guy, but someone needs to help him with his wardrobe. He's dressed like a gas station attendant from 1985. The tone shifted. The kindness got tangled with criticism. Strangers debated whether Lily should be on camera, whether Michael's southern-tinged drawl was real or performed, whether his single dad story had been manufactured by the network for views. He didn't answer any of it, wouldn't have known how. But he saw it. Carla tried to buffer him from the worst of it, but even Pine Grove had internet now, and once something was out there, it didn't go back. One night, after tucking Lily in, he scrolled for longer than he meant to. His name trended beside hashtags that had nothing to do with cars or babies. One post showed a blurry photo of him at the grocery store captioned, "Can we talk about those jeans, though?" He closed the app and set the phone face down on the counter. The spotlight, it turned out, didn't just highlight the good. It magnified everything. The cracks, the wear, the quiet moments no one was ever supposed to see. Michael used to take pride in staying invisible. Now, he couldn't go to the gas station without someone recognizing him. And every handshake, every compliment, felt like it came with a silent question. "Are you still the man we thought you were?" He hadn't changed, not really, but the world around him had. The first note home was handwritten in pencil on the back of a math worksheet. "Lily seemed distracted today, unusually quiet. Please check in with her." Michael read it 3 times at the kitchen table that night, the same table where Lily used to color while he sorted bills, where they used to laugh over cereal and make plans for made-up holidays like Backward Sock Day. He stared at the note until the pencil marks blurred. He'd been gone more often lately. Not far, just enough. Filming days had started creeping into weekends. Episodes needed retakes, voiceovers, travel to nearby towns for new stories. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a grind. And slowly the space between him and Lily had widened like a crack in an old windshield. The second note came a week later, typed this time, more formal. Lily had a conflict with another student. She refused to participate in reading circle and threw a book across the room. He stared at the paper as if it might explain itself. That night, he sat at the edge of her bed, the same way he always had. She wasn't asleep. Her eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling. "Hey, Bug," he said softly. "Your teacher said you had a rough day." She didn't answer. He reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Want to talk about it?" She turned away from him. "You weren't there." The words were quiet, but they landed hard. "I had to go film," he said carefully. "They needed me in Hillsboro. A farmer got trapped in his shed during a storm. It was serious." "I needed you too," she whispered. "But I guess I'm not serious." He sat back, stunned. "Lily, that's not fair." "No," she snapped, sitting up now, eyes glistening. "What's not fair is everyone saying how amazing you are when you don't even see me anymore." Michael's throat tightened. He reached for her, but she scooted to the far end of the bed. "You used to pick me up early from school," she said, her voice cracking. "Now the bus driver doesn't even know your name. You used to be here, Daddy, not just on TV." He didn't know what to say. The cameras had taken his face to the world, but somehow he'd let his presence vanish at home. "I'm sorry," he finally said. She wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "Can you be my dad again tomorrow?" His voice caught, but he nodded. "Yeah, tomorrow I'll be here, just us." She lay back down, and he stayed by her side until her breathing slowed. And when she finally drifted off, Michael walked downstairs, turned off his phone, and pulled the plug from the router. He didn't need more connection. He needed less noise. The next morning came slowly, wrapped in quiet. No alarms, no cameras, no calls, just the low hum of the furnace and the soft patter of snow melting off the roof. Michael poured 2 bowls of cereal and waited for Lily to shuffle down in her slippers. She smiled when she saw him already at the table. Not a big smile, but enough. After she left for school, he found himself lingering in the living room. The stillness felt foreign, like he'd stepped into a memory. The sun filtered through the lace curtains Maggie had picked out years ago, casting soft shadows across the floor. He moved to the shelf above the fireplace, absently dusting, straightening. That's when his hand brushed the edge of the old photo frame, one that held a picture of him, Maggie, and baby Lily, cheeks pink from the cold, bundled in matching scarves. The frame had been there for years, unmoved. But something felt off today. He turned it over to wipe the back, and that's when he saw it. A folded piece of paper, yellowed at the corners, tucked into the space between the photo and the backing. His hands trembled as he slid it out. It was her handwriting, no doubt about it, slanted, neat, always slightly too small. "Michael, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the timing right." Which, let's face it, wouldn't surprise you. I've never been great with timing, but I wrote this because I know you. I know how you carry things, quietly, alone. And I know there will come a day when you feel like you're losing your way, like you're trying to be everything for everyone, and in the process, you forget the one person who matters most, Lily. She doesn't need perfect. She doesn't need rich. She needs present. That's all. Just you. Your hands, your voice, your laugh. Don't give the world what belongs to her, and if you're ever in doubt, go find her and ask what she needs. She'll tell you the truth better than anyone ever could. Also, check under the floorboard in the bedroom closet. There's a box. You'll know what it's for. I love you. Always. Maggie. Michael sat down slowly, the paper soft and fragile in his hands. The world outside kept spinning, but inside time stopped. She'd seen this coming, not the show, not the cameras, but the drift. He read the letter again, then once more. Then he stood, walked up the stairs, opened the bedroom closet, and pulled up the loose floorboard Maggie always used to nag him about. The box was there, dusty, taped shut. Inside, a stack of handwritten notes for Lily, one for every birthday until age 18. A worn-out stuffed bear Michael had forgotten they even owned, and a smaller envelope with 3 words across the front, for when you feel lost. Michael didn't open that one yet. He didn't need to. Not today. Because for the first time in weeks, he knew exactly where he needed to be. The snow had turned to slush again, soaking the edges of Michael's boots as he paced outside the garage with a decision heavy in his chest. The letter from Maggie was still folded neatly in his back pocket, like a compass he couldn't ignore. Every instinct told him the same thing. Walk away. End it. The cameras, the attention, the expectations, they were never part of his life plan. And they sure as hell weren't part of Lily's. He had drafted a text to Carla 3 times already. Short, final. I'm done. Thanks for everything. I need to go back to being a dad, not a story. But he hadn't hit send. Not yet. Instead, he stood out there, watching his breath foggy in the air, waiting for the right moment to become the man Maggie believed he was. The man who didn't get caught chasing the wrong kind of enough. A car pulled up. Carla's, unmistakably sleek against the muddy roadside. She stepped out, her boots crunching against the slush, sunglasses perched in her hair, coat cinched like she was headed to a magazine shoot instead of a small-town garage. "You didn't text me back," she said, walking toward him with a cautious smile. "Which means either you're still thinking, or you're about to slam a door in my face." Michael didn't smile. I was going to walk. Carla's expression didn't change. She'd expected this. "I read the letter," he added, "from Maggie, my wife. She knew what mattered, and it wasn't TV deals." Carla crossed her arms, not defensive, just present. "You think I don't understand that? You don't live it." "You're right," she said softly. "I don't? But I respect the hell out of it. And I'm not here to convince you to keep doing something that hurts your family. I'm here to offer you something different." Michael raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "What if we restructured the show?" Carla said. "You set the schedule. We film around you, not the other way. You pick the stories. We stay local. No late nights, no travel without Lily, no surprises. You're not our product, you're our partner." Michael didn't respond right away. The offer felt sincere, but he'd grown wary of sincerity with a camera in the background. Carla stepped closer. "Look, you're not just content to me, Michael. You're a reminder that good still exists, that people show up for each other without a script, and maybe the world needs that right now, but only if it doesn't break the thing that makes you you." He looked down at the snow melting around their feet, thought of Lily's quiet voice in the dark. "Can you be my dad again tomorrow?" "And if I say no?" he asked. Carla smiled. "Then I shake your hand, thank you for what you've given the world, and let you go back to being the man Pine Grove already knew you were." Michael took a long breath, and for the first time since this whole thing started, he didn't feel trapped. He felt free to choose, and that changed everything. The first sign of change came quietly. New street lamps installed along Main, their sleek black poles standing a little too tall, a little too modern, casting a white glow that felt foreign in a town used to amber and soft shadows. Then came the cafe remodel. The Smiths tore out their hand-painted sign and replaced it with something printed, corporate clean. Same homemade pies inside, but the charm outside? Gone. At first, it seemed like something to celebrate. Pine Grove had always been a quiet town, a tucked-away corner of the world where time moved a little slower and people still left keys in their ignitions. But after Michael's story went viral, the cameras hadn't been the only ones watching. Tourists began trickling in, then streaming, then flooding. They came for the garage, for the man who delivered a baby in a snowstorm, for selfies in front of the now famous service bay. The local diner even added a menu item called the Hero Breakfast, 3 eggs, bacon, and a side of humility. Michael never asked for any of it. He smiled when asked for photos. He signed the napkins they handed him, but deep down, he started to feel like a statue at a museum dedicated to something he didn't quite believe in. With the attention came money, and with the money came opportunity. A real estate developer from the city showed up, offering to buy out the old hardware store for a boutique hotel. Locals argued, some excited, others afraid. Mayor Collins, who once judged the pie contest at the county fair, started showing up to town meetings in suits and talking about economic scaling. Even Michael's garage wasn't immune. A branding team came in with fresh paint swatches and logo mock-ups. One of them suggested rebranding the shop as Dad On-Call Automotive, complete with a slick new font and a slogan, "Kindness that gets you running." Michael said no, politely but firmly. Still, he noticed more changes creeping in. The gas station stopped carrying locally made goods. The school added a media tech class, inspired by the town's new brush with fame. Some of the charm faded. Some of the soul stretched thin. And the people? Some thrived. Others grew resentful. There were whispers now about how Michael had changed, about how things used to be better before the world showed up. One afternoon he sat on the bench outside the garage, Lily beside him, their shoes dusted with gravel and melted snow. "Why is everything getting fancy?" she asked, swinging her legs. He looked around at the street banners with his face on them, at the line of out-of-towners snapping photos of his front door. "Because people think change means better," he said slowly. "But better doesn't always mean right." She nodded, thoughtful. "I miss when it was just quiet." "Me too," he admitted. Pine Grove wasn't the town he'd grown up in anymore, but maybe it didn't have to be frozen in time. Maybe it just needed someone to protect its heart while the rest of it evolved. So the next day, Michael painted over the new logo mock-up on the garage wall himself, not out of bitterness, but out of love, out of memory, out of the belief that progress meant nothing if it erased the place that taught him how to care in the first place. He didn't mind that Pine Grove was growing. He just hoped it remembered who it was. Michael didn't announce it. He didn't leave a voicemail. He didn't write it on a calendar. He just packed 2 bags with enough clothes for the weekend, tossed a thermos of cocoa into the truck, and woke Lily up before the sun had even dared to stretch. She rubbed her eyes groggily, already smiling when she saw the boots by the door. "Where are we going?" she asked through a yawn. "Someplace quiet," Michael said. "Just us." The old cabin belonged to a friend of Maggie's family, unused for years, buried deep in the hills 3 hours north of Pine Grove. The road up was narrow and half forgotten, with pine trees pressing close like they were guarding a secret. No cell towers, no reception, no one to ask for autographs. It was exactly what they needed. By noon, they'd made a fire. By 1, they were sipping cocoa in mismatched mugs, their socks toasting near the hearth. The windows framed a picture of snow-draped stillness, thick woods, frozen branches, and a lake that glittered like glass through the trees. No cameras, no producers, no microphones disguised as coffee mugs, just breath and wind and the creak of the old wooden beams overhead. Lily spent the first hour building a lopsided snowman and the second digging a tunnel beside it. Michael shoveled the walk, then stopped halfway through just to watch her laugh with no one watching. That night, after dinner, they sat under a heavy quilt by the fireplace, the only light coming from the flicker of flames and the soft glow of the oil lamp. Lily curled against him with a book in her lap. "Tell me a story," she whispered. "What kind?" he asked. "One that isn't about babies and snowstorms," she said with a grin. He chuckled and told her the story of how he once locked himself inside his own garage for 2 hours because he thought a raccoon was a ghost. She laughed so hard her nose crinkled. Later, when she was asleep, Michael sat in the quiet and stared into the fire. The silence was more than absence of sound. It was the presence of peace. He could hear himself think. He could feel Maggie's memory more clearly here, not in the noise of fame or the buzz of lights, but in the stillness they used to share over burnt marshmallows and late-night tea. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope Maggie had written, for when you feel lost, still unopened, still waiting. But he didn't need it, not tonight. Because for the first time in months, he wasn't chasing anything. He wasn't performing. He wasn't being watched. He was just a dad, beside a fire, in the mountains, with his daughter breathing steady in the next room. And in that silence, he remembered who he was. Not the hero mechanic, not the face of a feel-good show, just Michael, just home. The snow had melted into memory by the time Susan returned to Pine Grove again, this time with less mystery and more intention. She arrived without a camera crew, without Amanda or anyone else from the show, just herself and a notebook, worn soft at the corners, the edges frayed like she'd thumbed through it one too many nights under dim hotel lights. Michael was under the hood of an old Chevy when she walked into the garage, her footsteps quiet but sure. He glanced up, wiping his hands on a rag, and smiled. The baby carrier was gone this time, just her, wrapped in a light jacket, hair wind-tousled, eyes thoughtful. "Back for another heater fix?" he teased. She smiled. "Something like that." They sat outside on the bench, same as before, the afternoon sun warming their shoulders. Lily was at school, the shop was quiet, and the world, for once, wasn't asking anything of him. "I've been writing," Susan said after a few minutes. "A book, a memoir." Michael raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I thought it would be about career," she continued. "Power. What it's like to be the woman in charge of a world that doesn't expect you to be. But after that day, after you, everything shifted. I realized the story I want to tell. It isn't about me at all." Michael leaned back, resting his elbows on the top of the bench. "So what is it about?" "It's about that moment," she said, her voice softer now. "The snow, the panic, the calm you gave me when everything was falling apart. It was more than just a birth. It was a reset, a reminder that real people, people like you, still exist." He didn't speak. He'd never seen himself as someone worth writing about. Fixing radiators, keeping his daughter fed, showing up when no one else could, that was just life. That wasn't a story. But Susan pulled out her notebook and opened to a page near the center. Handwritten across the top were the words, "The Man in the Snowstorm." "I want you to help me write this chapter," she said, meeting his eyes. "Co-write it with me, from your side, from your voice. The world's heard my version. They need to hear yours too." Michael let the words sit for a while. He looked down at the floorboards, then back at her. "Why me?" "Because it was your hands that caught my daughter, your voice that kept me grounded, and because when the cameras were rolling, you were the only one who forgot they were there. That kind of honesty deserves ink." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the bench. "I'm not a writer." "You don't have to be. Just tell the truth. I'll help shape it." He thought of Lily, of Maggie's letter, of the envelope still tucked away, unopened, and then he thought of how many men like him lived lives that never got written down. How many did the right thing quietly, unseen? "All right," he said, I'll try." Susan smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need to be recorded to matter. And just like that, a new kind of story began. D'Etienne, one made not of drama, but of grace. One chapter at a time. The email came on a Tuesday, buried between an overdue parts invoice and a PTO flyer from Lily's school. Michael almost deleted it without opening. Subject lines like, "Exciting opportunity for co-authors," usually meant spam or someone trying to sell him a seminar, but this one had Susan's name in the CC line, and that was enough to pause his thumb. It was from a major publisher in New York, one of the big ones. They'd read the draft chapter. They were moved, and they wanted more. A full memoir, not just from Susan, from both of them. Michael stared at the screen like it had grown teeth. He'd written his parts the only way he knew how, by hand, on yellow legal pads, during quiet evenings after Lily had gone to bed. Honest words, uneven paragraphs, raw memories from a snowy road and the years that came before it. He hadn't meant for them to be anything special, just true. And somehow, that truth had struck a chord. Susan called later that night, practically vibrating through the phone. "Michael, they're not just interested, they're excited. They want to rush the timeline, get it out before the end of the year. They're calling it a story the world needs right now." He sat at the kitchen table, blinking at the blinking cursor of his ancient laptop. "It's just what happened," he said quietly. "Exactly," Susan said. "That's what makes it matter." When he told Lily, her eyes lit up like he'd just offered her a unicorn. "You're going to be in a book? Like a real one, in a library?" He nodded, chuckling. "Looks like it." She grinned. "Can I draw the pictures?" He thought she meant doodles, just for fun. But when the publisher saw her sketches of the snowstorm, the garage, and that tiny baby wrapped in a towel, they asked if she'd illustrate the cover. She nearly passed out. And so, just like that, The Man in the Snowstorm became more than a project. It became a family legacy. Michael's voice told the story, Susan's pen shaped it, and Lily's drawings brought it to life with all the wonder only a child can see. When the first printed copy arrived in the mail, Michael didn't open it right away. He sat with it on his lap for a long time, staring at the hand-drawn cover, the bold title, and the little heart in the corner with 3 tiny letters, LD. He ran his fingers over the spine, cracked it open to the dedication, and read the words Susan had insisted be printed first, to those who show up when it matters most and never expect a camera to notice. He closed the book gently, exhaled, and whispered, "Maggie would have loved this." And in that moment, Michael Dawson, mechanic, father, reluctant public figure, was no longer just a face on a screen. He was part of something lasting, something written in ink and heart, something that wouldn't melt when the snow did. The call came just after sunset, during one of those rare, peaceful evenings when everything felt still. Lily was upstairs, humming to herself while painting stars on the ceiling of her room. Michael was in the garage, reorganizing shelves that didn't really need reorganizing just to feel useful. The phone buzzed in his pocket, unknown number, city code he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. "Mr. Dawson?" the voice said, smooth, practiced, far too polite to be trusted. "Trevor Marks, Public Pulse Weekly. I'm working on a piece for an upcoming feature. Would you have a moment to answer a few questions?" Michael rubbed the back of his neck. "Depends on the questions." A pause. A smile tucked behind the voice. "Fair enough. We're running a story about your rise, viral fame, television, the memoir. People are curious. Where did you come from? Who is the hero mechanic, that sort of thing." "I'm just a guy who showed up," Michael said flatly. "Yes, well," Trevor continued, "we did a little digging just as part of our due diligence, and we came across something from years ago, a DUI charge, rural Missouri, night of April 6th, 2004. You pled guilty, did the program, paid the fine. It's all there, public record." Michael closed his eyes. That name, that night, that version of himself. He hadn't thought about it in years. It was a scar long faded, but not forgotten. "I was 21, he said quietly. "One mistake. No one got hurt. I did everything the court asked, and I've spent every day since trying to be better than I was." "I believe you," Trevor said too easily, "but others might not. Readers like a clean hero, Mr. Dawson, a perfect one. And while this story doesn't disqualify you from being admired, it certainly changes the tone, don't you think?" Michael clenched his jaw. "You didn't call to ask questions. You called to offer a warning." "I'm giving you a chance to respond," Trevor replied, casual as a shrug. Would you like to make a statement before we run the piece?" Michael didn't answer. He hung up instead. That night, the weight of that call sat heavy on his chest. He stood in the doorway of Lily's room, watching her sleep under her painted stars, and wondered how long peace was allowed to last before the past came knocking. Downstairs, he opened the envelope from Maggie, the one labeled, "For when you feel lost." Inside, a single note in her delicate handwriting. "The world will look for cracks. Don't be ashamed of them. They're how the light gets in." Michael folded the note and placed it over his heart. He wasn't a perfect man, but he was no longer the one who made that mistake, and he'd never pretend otherwise. Tomorrow, the world would hear his truth from his own mouth, not because he had to, but because it was time. The garage was quiet the next morning, but not still. There was a kind of hum in the air, the kind that comes when something real is about to happen. Michael stood in front of the camera crew, wearing his usual flannel shirt, not pressed, not new, and no script in hand, just a cup of coffee, calloused fingers, and the weight of a story he'd carried for 2 decades. Carla had offered to bury it. "We can spin it," she said, her voice low, almost apologetic. "Or we don't have to mention it at all. You don't owe anyone an explanation." But Michael had shaken his head. "I do," he said. "Not for the past, for the people watching now." The boom mic lowered. The red light blinked to life. The crew nodded, and Michael looked straight into the lens. Not polished, not prepared, just present. "I made a mistake," he said, "a big one. I was 21, angry, reckless, and grieving a father I hadn't said goodbye to properly. I drank too much and got behind the wheel. I was lucky. No one was hurt. But that night changed me." He didn't blink. He didn't look away. "I paid the price. Fines, classes, community service. I carried the guilt for years. Still do. But I learned. And since then, I've worked every day to be someone that night never could have imagined." He took a breath. "This isn't a story about a perfect man. It's about a broken one who decided not to stay broken, about second chances, about doing better when you know better. And I'm not ashamed of that." The room stayed silent after he finished. Carla's eyes glistened. The cameraman lowered the lens slowly like he had just seen something sacred. That episode aired the following week. No cuts, no edits, just Michael. And the world listened. Comments poured in, not judgment, but grace. "My brother needed to hear this today. This man just taught my son more about accountability than I ever could. Heroes aren't perfect. They're honest." Even the tabloid that had threatened to run the story retracted its draft, citing a rare example of a man who told his own truth louder than we ever could. Michael didn't celebrate. He didn't glow. But that night he sat beside Lily on the couch as she leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Daddy." And that meant more than 1,000 good headlines. Because Michael hadn't just owned his story, he'd taken back the pen. The old garage still smelled like oil and stubborn metal, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like something barely hanging on. It felt like possibility. The cracked linoleum was gone, replaced by sealed concrete with embedded floor drains. The ancient space heaters had been swapped out for radiant coils under the floor. The lights overhead were LED now, bright and clean, but still humming with the familiar warmth of the shop's past. Michael stood in the center of it all, hands on his hips, taking in what used to be a place of survival. Now it was something else, something that breathed. He didn't want a flashy renovation, no neon signs, no waiting lounge with cappuccino machines. What he wanted was to give the place back its soul, and then some. The kind of place where kids with rough homes or rough hands could come, learn the language of engines and bolts and responsibility. So he used a slice of his book advance and show earnings, not for more screen time, but for something real. He kept the sign out front the same. Dawson's Garage. No branding agency, no slogans, just a new plaque beside the door that read, "Built on mistakes, rebuilt with purpose." The back room, once stacked with forgotten tires and rusted frames, had been transformed into a training bay. 2 donated cars sat waiting, stripped down and ready for learning. There were shelves full of tools, labeled, clean, and neatly organized, something Michael never thought he'd live to see in his own shop. He reached out to the high school counselor, asked for names. Kids falling behind, kids skipping class, kids who had fire but no direction. Within 2 weeks, 5 teenagers stood in his garage with rolled-up sleeves and that look in their eyes, the one he used to wear when he was desperate to feel useful. He didn't lecture them. He handed them sockets and grease pens, showed them how to change oil, taught them how to listen for the sound of a dying alternator, how to treat an engine with respect. Some of them didn't say much, but one boy, Marcus, came in early every morning just to practice loosening bolts without breaking them. "You think I can really do this?" he asked one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. Michael looked him straight in the eye. "If you can show up and try every day, you already are." Word spread quickly. Parents started calling. A teacher donated shop manuals. One retired mechanic showed up with a crate of brand-new spark plugs and said, "Put these to better use than I ever did." It became more than a garage. It became a promise. Lily spent her afternoons there too, handing out lemonade to the teens, sketching drawings of cars on the whiteboard, pretending to be the manager. She even gave the training program a name, Second Gear. Michael laughed when she told him, but later the name stuck with him, because that's what it was. A second chance, for the garage, for the kids, for himself. And every time he saw one of those teens walk in with dirt under their nails and hope in their eyes, he knew. He hadn't just revived a building, he'd rebuilt the future. It started slowly, like most good things in Pine Grove, not with parades or speeches, but with small gestures that slipped under the radar. A fresh coat of paint on the old library's front steps. A broken swing replaced at the park. Someone weeded the flower beds in front of the post office, and no one knew who, but everyone noticed. Michael saw it in glimpses as he drove through town. Mr. Hanley, who hadn't left his porch since his wife passed, was now out every morning helping the hardware clerk fix the sidewalk ramp. Teenagers, some of them the very kids from the garage, were volunteering at the senior center on weekends, changing light bulbs and clearing snow without being asked. Even the diner, which had been on the verge of closing, suddenly had a line out the door. A local farmer partnered with the owners to supply fresh eggs and milk, and Lily had helped redesign the menu cover using one of her colorful sketches, complete with a smiling wrench and a stack of pancakes. People were still coming to Pine Grove to see the garage, but they were staying for everything else. The local bookstore reopened, this time run by 2 sisters who used to commute to the city but quit their jobs to try something brave. They started hosting reading nights, one for kids, one for adults, with hot cider and old blankets folded on every chair. Michael was roped into reading aloud once. He did it nervously with too many stumbles and one full-page mispronunciation, but the applause afterward made his ears burn in the best way. The church next door, empty for nearly a year, came alive again, not with sermons, but with community potlucks and free coat drives. A group of veterans turned the old firehouse into a workshop for teaching carpentry and welding. Local musicians started jamming outside the general store on Saturday mornings, guitars and banjos echoing through the street like Pine Grove had a pulse again. Even Mayor Collins, who had once been content with ribbon cuttings and pancake breakfasts, started rolling up his sleeves. He helped haul lumber, he helped hang signs, he planted a row of new trees along the elementary school fence, and didn't bother with the press release. One night, during a town meeting in the high school gym, someone stood up and said, "We've all been waiting for someone else to fix things. Turns out we just needed to see someone try." Michael sat near the back with Lily, who leaned her head on his shoulder as the room filled with quiet nods and something rare, shared belief. They weren't chasing headlines. They were chasing meaning. They weren't trying to make Pine Grove famous, they were making it home again. And Michael knew then what he'd only hoped before. You don't need to save a town, you just need to remind it that it can save itself. The letter came in a sleek, embossed envelope with a gold foil seal, so unlike anything else in Michael's mailbox that he nearly tossed it aside, assuming it was another promotional gimmick. But something about the weight of it, the care in its corners, made him pause. He slid it open with his pocket knife and pulled out a thick card, cream-colored, the words raised in elegant lettering that made him feel like he was holding something far too formal for a mechanic with grease on his fingers. He read the first sentence twice. Dear Mr. Dawson, we are pleased to inform you that your series, Dad on Call, has been nominated for the National Humanitarian Media Award, recognizing broadcast programs that have made a lasting impact through authentic stories of hope, service, and compassion. He blinked, read the paragraph again. The letter went on, thanking him for restoring faith in humanity, for highlighting the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and concluded with a personal invitation to speak at the Global Summit on Ordinary Heroes, a televised event that brought together community leaders, activists, and difference-makers from around the world. Michael set the letter down on the kitchen counter next to Lily's half-finished science project and a bowl of week-old fruit. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a long breath. It didn't feel real, or maybe it did, and that's what scared him. Carla called the next day, already buzzing with energy. "Do you know how rare this is?" she said, almost breathless. "This isn't just about the show, Michael. This is about you. They want you to stand in front of the world and speak." "About what?" he asked. "I'm not a politician. I'm not a preacher." "No," she said. "You're better. You're honest. They want someone who doesn't rehearse their heart before speaking it." He wasn't sure what to say. What did a man from Pine Grove, who once thought success meant paying the heating bill on time, say to a global stage? That night, he sat with Lily on the porch, watching the stars blink to life above them. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Are you going to go?" she asked. "I don't know," he said truthfully. "It's a big deal." "You talk to people all the time now," she reminded him. "You helped Mrs. Green fix her furnace on TV while she was crying and wearing one shoe." He chuckled. "That's different." "Not really," she said. "You're just helping more people now." He thought about that long after she went to bed, about how the world had changed around him, about how he hadn't asked for any of this, and yet here it was. Not fame, not fortune, but a moment to stand in front of strangers and tell them that kindness still worked, that being decent, being present, still meant something. He picked up the letter again, read it under the kitchen light, then reached for a pen. He would go, not to represent a network or a show or a headline, but to remind the world that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear flannel, and they just show up. The gymnasium buzzed with folding chairs and nervous parents, the kind of small-town excitement that turned elementary school plays into full-scale events. Paper stars dangled from the ceiling. Glittered cardboard trees lined the stage. Pine Grove Elementary's annual Winter Wonders performance was about to begin, and Michael had snagged a seat in the second row, camera tucked in his coat pocket, bouquet of daisies, Lily's favorite, in his hand. He was exhausted. Just 2 days ago, he'd accepted the invitation to speak at the Global Summit. Carla was already planning travel arrangements and media prep. The world was pulling on him again, but tonight he wasn't Dad on Call. He was just Lily's dad, sitting among other parents with mittens in their laps and phones aimed at the stage. The show began with squeaky songs and crooked halos. Lily appeared halfway through in a hand-sewn cape, deep blue with silver stars, something Maggie would have called magical. She was playing the North Wind. Her lines were short, rehearsed carefully for weeks, and she nailed them with the kind of confidence only a child with nothing to prove could muster. Then, just as the music was about to swell for the final curtain, the principal stepped onto the stage and tapped the mic. "We have one last surprise," she said, smiling. "One of our students wrote a few words for tonight. She asked to read them, and we thought it was the perfect way to close the evening. Lily Dawson, come on up." Michael blinked. He hadn't known. She hadn't said a word. Lily stepped forward, still in her cape, holding a folded piece of notebook paper. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice, when she began, was clear. "My name is Lily, and I'm in Mr. Adams's third-grade class. I was supposed to say something about the stars and snow, but I wrote something else instead." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Michael. "My dad helps people, a lot of people. He was on TV when a baby got born in the snow, and now he's in a book and on posters, but that's not why I think he's a hero." The gym went still. "He's a hero because he makes me pancakes when I feel sad, because he taught me how to change a tire, because he always tucks me in, even when he's tired, even when his phone rings. He's the same person on the news and at home, and that's how I know he's real." Michael felt his throat tighten, heart pounding louder than the applause that was already starting. Lily smiled, her cheeks flushed, eyes bright. "So if anyone asks me who my hero is, I'll say this. It's the guy who fixes things, even when they're invisible." She stepped back, and the room erupted. Michael stood, barely holding the flowers in his hands, not even trying to hide the tears that gathered in his eyes. Around him people clapped. Some wiped their cheeks, others nodded like they'd just heard something they'd been needing to believe again. Afterward, Lily rushed into his arms, still beaming. "You knew?" he asked, voice thick. She shook her head. "Nope, I just felt it." And in that moment, surrounded by folding chairs, paper stars, and the quiet hum of a town that finally understood, Michael realized it wasn't the awards or the cameras or even the speeches that mattered most. It was that his daughter saw him, all of him, and loved him because of it. That was the only spotlight he ever needed. The first snow of December fell like a whisper, soft, slow, almost too delicate to be real. Pine Grove's downtown was aglow with Christmas lights strung from every awning and fence post. The whole town, bathed in warm yellows and reds that flickered gently against the night sky. The trees lining Main Street shimmered with fresh powder, their branches twinkling as if someone had dusted them with stars. Michael stood outside the garage, hands in his coat pockets, watching Lily and a few of her friends slide down a nearby hill on plastic sleds, their laughter echoing down the quiet street. The town had just finished its annual tree-lighting ceremony, and most of the crowd had filtered into the diner for cocoa and pie. But Michael stayed behind. He liked the hush after the celebration, the way the night seemed to settle and breathe. He didn't hear Susan approach, but when she appeared beside him, bundled in a deep green coat and scarf, her cheeks pink from the cold, he wasn't surprised. "Still your favorite spot?" she asked, nudging him gently. "Some things don't change," he said, smiling sideways. "You avoiding the sugar rush in there?" She laughed. "Too many marshmallows, too many opinions about whipped cream." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching Lily run, fall, and laugh her way back to the top of the hill. "She's grown so much," Susan said quietly. "She's got your steadiness, your stubbornness too, I bet." Michael chuckled. She definitely didn't get it from Maggie's side. Susan turned to face him, her breath visible between them, her expression softer than he'd seen it in weeks. "I never really thanked you for saying yes to the book, for being part of it. It changed my life." "You gave me the words I didn't know I needed," he said. "That day on the road, that moment, it made me remember what mattered." She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a tiny box. Not a ring box, just a small, square container wrapped in red string. She handed it to him, her eyes shining but steady. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a pen, simple, wooden, hand-carved. On the side, etched in delicate script, it read, "Let's write the rest together." Michael looked up slowly. "I know we haven't defined this," Susan said. voice trembling just enough to betray her nerves. "But I've come to love the way you see the world, the way you move through it, the way you never ask to be seen, but still show up. And I know what love feels like now. It's quiet, like the way you make coffee or brush Lily's hair. It's snowflakes that don't shout, but still change everything when they fall." Michael swallowed hard. He wasn't a man of big gestures. He didn't recite poetry or quote movies, but in that moment, every part of him knew the answer wasn't complicated. "I'd write that story," he said, his voice low, sure. "Every chapter, every line." She smiled, the kind that crinkled at the corners, the kind that said yes before her lips could, and under the glow of Christmas lights, with snow collecting gently on their shoulders, Michael reached out, took her hand, and let a new kind of story begin, not with headlines or heroes, but with something steadier, quieter, something real. The call came just as Michael was finishing up the last chore of the day, replacing the light bulbs along the porch, the warm white kind Lily insisted looked cozier than the bright ones. It was Christmas Eve, the quiet part of the evening when the town had finally gone still. Snow had been falling all day in soft sheets, laying down a fresh blanket over Pine Grove's hills and rooftops. His phone buzzed, a local number he didn't recognize. He answered, expecting maybe a neighbor needing help shoveling or a church member with a flat tire, but the voice on the other end was shaky, frantic. "Is this Michael Dawson? I heard you're the one to call when something goes wrong." "Depends," Michael said, already reaching for his coat. "What's wrong?" "It's my neighbor, George. He lives out past Crooked Pine, near the ridge. He went out to check his generator and didn't come back. I tried calling, but his line's dead. No cell service out there. I can't get through the snow in my truck. I don't know what to do." Michael was already in the driver's seat before the man had finished his sentence. The old engine groaned to life, headlights slicing through the flurries. Crooked Pine was a long stretch of road with no streetlights and barely a shoulder. If someone went down out there in this weather, they wouldn't last long. By the time he reached the ridge, the snow was almost blinding, and the wind had picked up sharp and wild. Michael slowed to a crawl, scanning the ditches and tree line. He knew these woods, knew the curve in the road that liked to ice over before anything else, knew the way the snow could hide a man from sight in seconds. Then he saw it, a pair of faint tire tracks leading off the road and into a shallow gully barely visible beneath the white. He followed them with his headlights until they landed on a flicker of movement. George. The man was half buried in snow, one arm wrapped around a tree trunk, the other waving weakly in the air. Michael threw the truck in park and jumped out, snow swallowing his boots with every step. George's face was pale, his breath shallow, a thin line of blood along his temple. "Hang on, George," Michael said, kneeling beside him. "I've got you." He wrapped George in a thermal blanket, lifted him slowly, and carried him to the truck with a strength he didn't know he still had. Inside, he cranked the heat, pressed a bottle of water into George's hand, and turned the truck around with hands steady on the wheel. They drove in silence for a while, the world outside a swirling tunnel of snow. "Didn't think anyone would come," George whispered eventually. Michael glanced at him. "Then you called the wrong guy." George chuckled weakly. "You always answer calls like this?" Michael thought about it, about that snowy night with Jess and the baby, about the thousands of little moments since, about Lily's speech, about Susan's pen. "I do," he said, "not because of a show or a title, just because somebody needs to." When they pulled up to the clinic, the nurse was already waiting, thanks to Michael's call en route. George was helped inside, his neighbor arriving minutes later with tears in his eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Michael didn't stick around for thanks. He slipped back into his truck, the cab still warm from George's breath, and drove home through the snow as Christmas lights blinked faintly in the distance. That night, he sat by the fire with Lily and Susan, her hand resting gently over his, her thumb tracing quiet circles. "You okay?" Susan asked. He nodded. "Yeah." And for the first time in a long while, He felt the answer all the way through, because helping that man, without cameras, without praise, was a reminder. This whole journey didn't start because the world was watching. It started because someone needed him, and that had always been enough. By the time spring rolled around, the last of the media vans had vanished from Pine Grove. The network extended one more season of Dad on Call, but Michael politely declined. Carla understood. She always had. "It was never about the camera for you," she said over coffee during their final meeting. That's why it worked. He hugged her that day, not because she was leaving, but because she'd helped him say goodbye the right way. The show didn't end with a bang. There was no grand finale, just a simple voiceover, footage of Michael fixing a school bus engine, and a final line that said, more than fanfare ever could, he just kept showing up. And then, quiet. The garage never closed, not even for a day. The sign above the door, still worn at the edges, still read, Dawson's Garage. No neon, no branding, just a small addition carved in wood and mounted beside it, second gear, Est by Grace. Every Tuesday and Thursday, local teens filtered in after school, hands greasy by sundown, but heads held a little higher than they used to be. Michael didn't teach them how to be mechanics as much as he taught them how to keep trying. How to listen. How to tighten a bolt without forcing it. Lily sometimes helped grade their quizzes, though she mostly doodled spark plugs with smiley faces in the margins. Susan stayed, not all at once. At first it was weekends, then it was Tuesdays too. Then it was breakfast and bedtime stories, and holding Michael's hand without needing to say why. They didn't rush anything. Love, they'd both learned, didn't need a spotlight. It just needed room to breathe. Michael still got recognized from time to time at the grocery store, on long drives. Once, a man from Chicago pulled up just to say thanks for reminding him how to be a better father. But the request grew quieter. The question stopped being about fame and started being about faith, in kindness, in small towns, in second chances. The memoir hit bestseller lists briefly, but Michael barely noticed. He only found out because Lily ran in waving a library copy with his face on the inside flap, yelling, "You're next to Charlotte's Web." Life slowed down again, not in a boring way, in a real way. He helped build a new roof for the school, taught Lily how to change her first tire, took Grace, now toddling and fierce, on her first wagon ride through the farmer's market. At night, when the town was quiet and the air smelled like rain on gravel, he would sit on the porch with Susan, her head on his shoulder, the past folded neatly behind them. He didn't miss the spotlight. He missed nothing. Because the story, once built from chance and chaos, had settled into something better than headlines. It had become his life, rewritten, and finally complete. The crowd sat hushed beneath the wide white canopy, sunlight flickering through spring leaves overhead as the university's commencement ceremony unfolded. Chairs stretched in every direction, parents clutching programs, cameras poised in trembling hands. Somewhere near the front, Susan dabbed the corner of her eye with a tissue, her other hand clutching Michael's tightly, though she knew, without looking, that his own eyes had already missed it over. On stage, Lily Dawson adjusted the microphone with both hands. Her gown swayed gently in the breeze, the honor cords around her neck catching glints of sunlight. She stood tall, steady, not a trace of nerves in her voice as she began. "My name is Lily Dawson. I am a writer, an engineer, and the proud daughter of the man who taught me everything I ever needed to know about strength." A ripple moved through the crowd. He wasn't a politician, or a professor, or anyone the world expected to see on TV. He was a mechanic, a single dad, a man who once fixed his entire life with nothing but a wrench, a promise, and an open heart. A photo flashed behind her on the big screen. An old one, faded at the edges. Michael standing beside his garage, flannel sleeves rolled up, grease on his cheek, and a newborn wrapped in a flannel blanket in his arms. "It all started with a snowstorm," Lily continued. "A woman in labor, a broken-down car, no cameras at first, just need. And my dad, who never ran from someone in need. She paused, letting the silence settle before continuing. But that night wasn't a beginning because of what he did. It was a beginning because of who he was. That's what I've come to understand. That one act of kindness didn't just save a life. It changed his, and mine, and eventually millions of others. Michael looked down at his hands, older now, still rough around the edges, but today they felt light. "My dad didn't chase success," Lily said, her voice warm and unwavering. "He didn't chase attention. He chased meaning. And somehow, without even trying, he became a message, a reminder that it's not about fame or flash or headlines. It's about showing up when it's hard, when it's quiet, when no one else will." She held up the pen Susan had once carved, the same one Michael had carried in his coat pocket through every speech, every garage lesson, every emergency. "I carry this with me," she said, "because it's not just a pen, it's a promise. That the story he started doesn't end here, that I'll keep writing it, that we all can." The crowd rose to their feet, applause swelling like a wave. Michael didn't move right away. He just watched his daughter on that stage, standing tall in front of the world, speaking truth not from notes, but from the roots of her heart. And in that moment, it was clear. He had never needed the spotlight, because the brightest light in his life was shining right there, reading the story of the mechanic who became a message.